2020 has probably been one of the most difficult years in the history of the automotive business, as lockdown has seen both production volumes and sales tumble. Not only here, it's a global phenomenon. In fact, global industry analysis from Counterpoint Research is predicting a global automotive sales outlook of around 72 million units for 2020, a minus 20.1% decline against 2019. Now, the turbulent market has made trading, managing business and planning somewhat challenging. As an example, our retail price index shows unusual fluctuations as a result of the ever-changing macroeconomic environment. The last 3 months of lockdown have been especially difficult, with many dealers taking a big knock in sales and some sadly closing doors after many years in business. Now, trading conditions have never been more challenging, with dealerships initially closed and then operating under very strict lockdown conditions. Well, motoring expert Minnie talks to us about how consumer practices have changed and adapted during the COVID-19 based on the industry report. A very good morning to you, Minnie. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Kayo, and thanks for having me.
Well, let's start off with the data that was used in this industry report. How was that information collected?
Auto Trader sees most of the listings in the country. The sellers of cars list with Auto Trader mostly, and layered on top of that, those listings, we experience or see about 401 million searches for cars over the last year, as a matter of fact, and we've seen about 45 million searches across those cars in the last month. So Auto Trader is a really good proxy for demand, supply, and price, the economic model. And then what we did was we took unique technology, we rebuilt our database in terms of the taxonomy on cars, and we began to extract insights into the automotive industry, both from a demand, a supply, and price perspective. And this is the second annual car industry report that we've put out into the market in order to try and give those who operate in it some sort of insight into consumer demand and supply trends.
Now, according to the report, the top 10 cars seem to be cars that are relatively high consumers of fuel. Now, why are people trying to buy cars that use a lot of fuel, considering that the price of fuel has gone up consecutively this year?
Well, you'll notice that in our reports and in the data that we put out, half of all cars searched for are diesel. And diesel, as we know, is a vehicle that is lighter on fuel than petrol. So consumers in South Africa do opt for diesel cars. Many of these top 10 vehicles are also diesel vehicles or come in diesel variants. But that aside, car OEMs have worked hard, and mid-sized cars don't really fluctuate too much when it comes to a differential in fuel consumption. So I don't think it's the major factor when it comes to deciding to buy a car. And South Africa is a car-faring nation. We don't have the public transport infrastructure that other countries have, so we're forced to drive cars in this country.
Before lockdown, research showed that one of the top searched for vehicles was the Toyota Hilux. And then during the lockdown period, it became the VW Golf. Why the change in the trend of vehicle that people were searching for?
Well, I mean, first to say, South Africa is a bucky nation. We see Toyota Hilux and the Ford Ranger being amongst the top most searched for vehicles all the time. But during the lockdown, as you mentioned, the swing to the VW Golf happened, and the Toyota Hilux dropped to second place. So still up there in the top 10, but dropped to second place. And I would imagine that it's price pressure, because the VW Golf goes for about 50,000 Rand less than the Toyota Hilux. And it'll be interesting to see as the economy recovers if the Toyota Hilux gets back into top spot.
And talk to us a bit about the shift then in buyers looking for new cars at the beginning of the year. And when lockdown hit, people started to search more and more for used cars.
Yes, so public transport infrastructure that I mentioned earlier, and the non-existence of that by and large, SA has to drive. I mean, the UK fits into South Africa 5 times, and we saw a very similar trend in 2008. New car sales volumes now in the last month have fallen by about 30%, and used car sales volumes have largely recovered back to pre-lockdown levels. with a lot of dealers actually outperforming pre-lockdown volumes. But it's important to note that on a consolidated basis, both used and new, when added together, has seen a volume decline. Just new car alone saw a 13,000 unit decline in the last month, year on year. So on top of that, Auto Trader has seen search records, both June, July, and August for used car. And this is continuing, and we're up 50% versus 2019. So consumers are voting with their mouse or the proverbial thumb, and seeing greater value in used car over new. The country sells more than 2 times the used car volumes versus new, and that gap is growing even bigger. So all of the indications are that consumers are being prudent.
And just lastly, what's the average price range that people actually search for when they're looking for vehicles, and what does that tell us about our consumers' appetite?
It's a good question, Kao. And as lockdown hit, when we all had to stay in our homes, searches for 200,000 Rand cars plummeted. And at the same time, we saw an over 300% increase in searches for under 50,000 Rand cars. From lockdown level 4, there was a renewed surge in cars that were worth about 200,000 Rand, and it regained its position very quickly. Pre-lockdown, the top 3 most search for price brackets were 200,000 Rand, 100,000 Rand, and 300,000 Rand, in that order. During lockdowns level 5 and 4, the top 3 searched for vehicles were 200,000 Rand, and 50,000 Rand vehicles showed its face. And then the third spot was taken up by 100,000 Rand cars. So you can see that 300,000 Rand car search fell out of the top 3. During lockdown level 3, the top 3 positions switched back to what they were pre-lockdown. There was 200,000 Rand, 100,000 Rand, and 300,000 Rand cars. So it seems as though South Africans are resilient and react very quickly to macroeconomic factors. You know, another example was during lockdown we had small bakkies and vans and delivery vehicles surge, the search for them, when food deliveries opened. So consumers are very resilient, and they act very quickly in South Africa.